Hey, all. Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The man pictured here, James Francis Frank Crocker, marched into Pickett's charge with General Lewis A. Armistead's brigade at Gettysburg on July 3rd, 1863. During the charge, Crocker, a first lieutenant and adjutant of the 9th Virginia Infantry, was wounded in the right leg. It was his second injury of the war. Just a year earlier, he'd been wounded in the throat, the shoulder, and the arm at Malvern Hill. He recovered, but at Gettysburg, he was left behind on the battlefield with Armistead and others after Union forces repulsed the charge. He was captured and taken to a field hospital at the George Bushman farm. There, Crocker happened upon a local man, a civilian, who was helping out, Professor Martin Stover of Gettysburg College. The two men instantly recognized each other, for Crocker was valedictorian of Gettysburg College's class of 1850. Like many young Virginians who hailed from prosperous families, he'd been sent from his home in Isle of Wight County to the north for an education. Crocker and Stover talked of old times. Before long, Crocker was given liberty to roam about town. That leg injury, as it turned out, was minor. There he caught up with many of his former professors and reminisced about the old times before the war. Those good times, though, soon ended. Eventually, he was sent to the prison camp at Johnson's Island in Ohio. There, Crocker set out the rest of the war in captivity. After the end of hostilities, he signed the oath and resumed his career as an attorney, went on to become a judge and a board member at William and Mary College. He lived until 1917. Some 30 years after Gettysburg, he delivered an address before the Stonewall camp of Confederate veterans, very likely some of the same men who he fought with during the war and at Pickett's charge. The speech that he gave was published in the Southern Historical Society papers. That was in 1894, a time of reunification, a time of Confederate and Union soldiers meeting at reunions and trying to forge a path after such hostility, such violence between 1861 and 1865. I want to share a passage from Crocker's address. We begin after he described the first 2 days of the fight at Gettysburg. Crocker talks about the third day in Pickett's charge. He spoke these words to his fellow veterans in gray. He said, "And now the 3rd of July has come. The summer sun, early heralded by roseate dawn, rises serenely and brightly from beyond the wooded hills. No darkening clouds obscure his bright and onward way. His aspect is as joyous as when Eden first bloomed under his rays. Earth and heaven are in happy accord. The song of birds, the chirp and motion of winged insects greet the early morn. The wild flowers and the cultivated grain of the fields are glad in their beauty and fruitage. The streams joyously ripple on their accustomed way, and the trees lift and wave their leafy branches in the warm, life-giving air. Never was sky or earth more serene, more harmonious, more aglow with light and life. In blurring discord with it all was man alone. Thousands and tens of thousands of men, once happy fellow countrymen, now in arms, had gathered in hostile hosts and in hostile confronting lines. It was not the roseate dawn nor rising sun that awoke them from the sleep of wearied limbs. Before the watching stars had withdrawn from their sentinel posts, the long roll, the prelude of battle, had sounded their reveille, and rudely awoke from them fond dreams of home and loved ones far away. For 2 days had battle raged. On the first, when the field was open and equal, the soldiers of the South, after most determined resistance, had driven their foe before them from position to position, from valley to hilltop, through field and through the town to the heights beyond. On the second day, On our right and our left, with heroic valor and costly blood, they had penetrated the lines and fortifications of the enemy, but were too weak to hold the prize of positions gained against overpowering numbers of concentrated reinforcements. The dead and wounded marked the lines of the fierce combat. The exploded caissons, the dismounted cannon, the dead artillery horses, the scattered rifles, the earth soaked with human gore, the contorted forms of wounded men, and the white, cold faces of the dead made a mockery and sad contrast to the serene and smiling face of the skies. From the Teamsters to the General in Chief, it was known that the battle was yet undecided, that the fierce combat was to be renewed. All knew that victory won or defeat suffered was to be at a fearful cost, that the best blood of the land was to flow copiously as a priceless oblation to the god of battle. The intelligent soldiers of the South knew and profoundly felt that the hours were potential, that on them possibly hung the success of their cause, the peace and independence of the Confederacy. They knew that victory meant so much more to them than to the enemy. It meant to us uninvaded and peaceful homes under our own rule and under our own nationality. With us, it was only to be left alone. With this end in view, all felt that victory was to be won at any cost. All were willing to die if only their country could thereby triumph. And fatal defeat meant much to the enemy. It meant divided empire, lost territory, and severed population. Both sides felt that the hours were big with the fate of the empire. The sense of the importance of the issue and the responsibility of fully doing duty equal to the grand occasion impress on us all a deep solemnity and a seriousness of thought that left no play for gay moods or for sympathy with nature's smiling aspect, however gracious. Nor did we lightly consider the perils of our duty. From our position in line of battle, which we had taken early in the morning, we could see the frowning and cannon-crowned heights far off held by the enemy. And a group of officers, a number of whom did not survive that fatal day, I could not help expressing that it was to be another Malvern Hill, another costly day to Virginia and Virginians. While all fully saw and appreciated the cost and the fearful magnitude of the assault, yet all were firmly resolved, if possible, to pluck victory from the very jaws of death itself. Never were men more conscious of the difficulty imposed on them by duty, or more determinedly resolved to perform it with alacrity and cheerfulness, even to annihilation, than were the men of Pickett's division on that day. We, undisturbed, with fortitude and even with ardent impatience, did await the command for the assault. The quiet of the day had been unbroken, save on our extreme left, where, in the early morning, there had been some severe fighting, but this was soon over, and now on both sides were at rest, waiting in full expectancy of the great assault, which the enemy, as well as we knew, was to be delivered. The hours commenced to go wearily by. The tension on our troops had become great. The midday sun had reached the zenith and poured its equal and impartial rays between the opposite ridges that bounded the intervening valley, running north and south. Yet no sound or stir broke the ominous silence. Both armies were waiting spectators for the great event. Upwards of 100,000 unengaged soldiers were waiting, as from a grand amphitheater, to witness the most magnificent heroic endeavor in arms that ever immortalized man. Still the hours lingered on. Why the delay? There is a serious difference of opinion between the general in chief and his most trusted lieutenant general as to the wisdom of making the assault. Lee felt, from various considerations, the forced necessity of fighting out a battle here, and having the utmost confidence in his troops, he fully expected victory if the attack be made as he had ordered. Longstreet, foreseeing the great loss of assaulting the entrenched position of the enemy and making such assault over such a distance under the concentrated fire urges that the army should be moved beyond the enemy's left flank with the hope of forcing him thus to abandon his stronghold or to fight us to our advantage. Longstreet pressed his view and delayed giving the necessary orders until Lee more peremptorily repeated his own order to make the assault. Even then, Longstreet was so reluctant to carry out the orders of Lee that he placed upon Lieutenant Colonel Alexander, who was in charge of the artillery on this day, the responsibility of virtually giving the order for its execution. At last, in our immediate front at 1 p.m., there suddenly leaped from one of the cannons a single, sharp, far-reaching sound, breaking the long-continued silence and echoing along the extended lines of battle and far beyond the far-off heights. All were now at a strained attention. Then quickly followed another gun. Friend or foe at once recognized that these were signal guns. Then hundreds of cannons opened upon each other from the confronting heights. What a roar! How incessant! The earth trembled under the mighty resound of cannon. The air is darkened with sulphurous clouds. The whole valley is enveloped. The sun, lately so glaring, is itself obscured. Nothing can be seen but the flashing light leaping from the cannon's mouth amidst the surrounding smoke. The air, which was so silent and serene, is now full of exploding and screaming shells and shot, as if the earth had opened and let out the very furies of Avernus. The hurtling and death-dealing missiles are plowing amidst batteries, artillery, and lines of infantry, crushing, mangling, and killing until the groans of the men mingle with the tempest's sound. The storm of battle rages. It is appalling, terrific, yet grandly exciting. It recalls the imagery of Byron's night storm amidst the Alps. The sky is changed, and such a change. Far along, from peak to peak, the rattling crags among, leaps the live thunder, not from one lone cloud, but every mountain now hath found a tongue, and Jura answers from her misty shroud back to the joyous Alps who call to her aloud. After 2 hours of incessant firing, the storm at last subsides. It has been a grand and fit prelude to what is now to follow. All is again silent. Well knowing what is to shortly to follow, all watch in strained expectancy. The waiting is short, only time for Pickett to report to his lieutenant general his readiness and to receive the word of command. Pickett said, "General, shall I advance?" Longstreet turned away his face and did not speak. Pickett repeated the question. Longstreet, without opening his lips, bowed in answer. Pickett, in a determined voice, said, "Sir, I shall lead my division forward," and galloped back and gave the order, "Forward, march." The order ran down through brigade, regimental, and company officers to the men. The men with alacrity and cheerfulness fell into line. Kemper's brigade on the right, Garnett's on his left, with Heath's division on the left of Garnett, formed the first line. Armistead's brigade moved in rear of Garnett's and Lane's, and Scales's brigade of Pender's division moved in rear of Heath, but not in touch nor in line with Armistead. As the lines cleared the woods and skirted the brow of the ridge and passed through our batteries with their flags proudly held aloft, waving in the air, with polished muskets and swords gleaming and flashing in the sunlight, they presented an inexpressibly grand and inspiring sight. It is said that when our troops were first seen there, ran along the line of the Federals, as from men who had waited long in expectancy, the cry, "There they come! There they come!" The first impression made by the magnificent array of our lines as they moved forward was to inspire the involuntary admiration of the enemy. Then they realized that they came terrible as an army with banners. Our men moved with quick step, as calmly and orderly as if they were on parade. No sooner than our lines came into full view, the enemy's batteries in front, on the right and the left, from Cemetery Hill to Round Top, opened on them with a concentrated, accurate, and fearful fire of shell and solid shot. These plowed through or exploded in our ranks, making great havoc, yet they made no disturbance. As to the orderly conduct and steady march of our men, they were as if they had not been. As the killed and wounded dropped out, our lines closed and dressed up as if nothing happened and went on with a steady march. I remember I saw a shell explode amidst the ranks of the left company of the regiment on our right. Men fell like 10 pins in a 10 strike. Without a pause and without losing step, the survivors dressed themselves to their line and our regiment to the diminished regiment, and all went on as serenely and as unfalteringly as before. My God, it was magnificent, this march of our men. What was the inspiration that gave them the stout courage, the gallant bearing, this fearlessness, this steadiness, this collective and individual heroism? It was home and country. It was the fervor of patriotism, the high sense of individual duty. It was blood and pride of state, the inherited quality of a brave and honorable ancestry. On they go, down the sloping sides of the ridge, across the valley, over the double fences, up the slope that rises to the heights, crowned with stone walls and entrenchments, studded with batteries and defended by multiple lines of protected infantry. The skirmish line is driven in, and now there bursts upon our ranks in front and on flank, like sheeted hail, a new storm of missiles, canister, shrapnel, and rifle shot. Still the column advances steadily and onward without pause or confusion. Well might Count de Paris describe it as an irresistible machine moving forward, which nothing could stop. The dead and wounded officers and men mark each step of advance, yet under the pitiless rain of missiles, the brave men move on, and then with a rush and cheering yell, they reach the stone wall. Our flags are planted on the defenses. Victory seems within our grasp, but more is to be done. Brave Armistead, coming up, overlaps the wall and calls on all to follow. Brave men follow his lead. Armistead is now among the abandoned cannon, making ready to turn them against their former friends. Our men are widening the breach of the penetrated and broken lines of the Federals, but now the enemy has made a stand and are rallying. It is a critical moment. That side must win, which can command instant reinforcements. They come not to Armistead, but they come to Webb, and they come to him from every side in overwhelming numbers in our front and with enclosing lines on either flank. They are pushed forward. Armistead is shot down with mortal wounds, and heavy slaughter is made of those around him. The final moment has come when there must be instant flight, instant surrender, or instant death. Each alternative is shared. Less than 1,000 escape of all that noble division, which in the morning numbered 4,700. All the rest either killed, wounded, or captured. All is over. As far as possible for mortals, they approached the accomplishment of the impossible. Their great feat of arms has closed. The charge of Pickett's division has been proudly, gallantly, and right royally delivered. And then at once, before our dead are counted, there arose from that bloody, immortalized field Fame, the mystic goddess, and from her trumpet and clarion notes there rang out upon the ear of the world the story of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. All over this country, equally north and south, millions listened and returned applause. Over ocean, fame wings her way. Along the crowded population and cities of Europe, she rings out the story. The people of every brave race intently listen and are thrilled. Over the famous battlefields of modern and ancient times, she weeps. Over the ruins and dust of Rome, the story is heralded. Thermopylae bears and applauds. The ancient pyramids catch the sound, and summing up the records of their hoary centuries, searching, find therein no story of equal courage. Away over the mounds of buried cities, fame challenges in vain a response from their past. Over the continents and the isles of the sea, the story runs. The whole world is tumultuous with applause. A new generation has heard the story with undiminished admiration and praise. It is making its way up through the opening years to the opening centuries. The posterities of all the living will gladly hear and treasure it and will hand it down to the end of time as an inspiration, an example of courage to all who shall hereafter take up arms. The intrinsic merit of the charge of Pickett's men at Gettysburg is too great, too broad, too immortal for the limitations of sections, of states, or of local pride. The people of this great and growing republic, now so happily reunited, have a common kinship, and a common heritage in this peerless example of American courage and American heroism. So there you have the address of Frank Crocker, 9th Virginia Infantry, about 30 years after the war, to a roomful of Confederate veterans, telling them the story of Pickett's charge and putting a context around it that spans the entire globe and spreads far into the future. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.